Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Modern Nonprofit Podcast. My name is Tosha Anderson and I'm your host. Today I've invited my friend Erik Hanberg here. Erik, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. I know that I get the reputation of being an accountant and all things financial and accounting and all of that sort of things. But one of my real passions is actually running the business that is the nonprofit and also leadership that's needed for effectively running these nonprofits. So Erik has written several books. Erik, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. You're going to do it much better than I am. But thank you so much for joining us, Erik, and tell us a little bit about what brought you to the place of deciding to write books on nonprofit leadership.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and chat with you and your audience. So I followed my passion into the world of small nonprofits. At 23, I was hired to be the director of a nonprofit movie theater and learning everything, from the ground up on what it meant to be at a nonprofit. Later, I was hired into the development office of my Catholic high school, which if you ever want to know what a fundraising machine looks like, it is that office. And in there, I saw all these things that I wish I had known when I was at the small nonprofit. Like auctions are a huge amount of work, and maybe I shouldn't have attempted to do it. Maybe there were some things like annual giving letters or some major gift asks that would have been way more easy for me. So that's where I first started writing, was what if I could teach my younger self what I wish I'd known about running a small nonprofit, about fundraising. So that was the birth of what I called the Little Book of Gold, fundraising for small and very small nonprofits. And then I just kept writing books. I was like, hey, I've been on the board of, at this point, like 12 some odd nonprofits. I'm an elected official in my town, so I have that board experience. So I have a book on board leadership and what it means to be a board member. I have one on social media and marketing for small nonprofits, and then most recently one on simply how to be an executive director.
Love that. So you mentioned small and very small. Can you be more specific about, what these organizations look like? It's really interesting. I can talk to an organization and they would define themselves as super small in their $5 million budget, or
Right.
Some organizations would define them 250,000 as small. So tell me, how would you define small and very small?
I think about it, if you want a number, I would say, under $1 million for sure. Probably in the few hundred thousands, I think, is this very common size for nonprofits. Very small is like under 100,000, maybe even in some cases, smaller than that, where essentially you're just talking about a director, maybe paid, maybe not, maybe part-time, who's doing the work and running it all at the same time. Usually what I think makes a small nonprofit is, there's no names on the board. There are a lot of roll up your sleeves and get it done kind of attitudes. The organization, if it has employees, is probably pretty flat. Most people report to the executive director. There's not 3 levels of hierarchies. That's the kind of nonprofit that I'm really trying to write to. I have experience at the big ones, as I said, the government experience, but I always like to write to the small guys. They need the help.
Definitely, definitely. So just to clarify, all of this that we're talking about obviously is geared towards executive directors or individuals in leadership. But I think it's pretty safe to say that this is valuable information for anybody that would aspire to be in a role like this. I find oftentimes the people that get put into that role, they've worked their way through the nonprofit industry, either within one organization and get promoted to a senior position, or maybe they've worked their way up into another organization and then they get hired on from a different organization in that senior leadership. So I think it's fair to say that all the things that we're talking about and the things in your book would be applicable to anyone in those camps, correct?
100%. And if you are applying for a job as an executive director, I would hope you check out the book. It'll give you a good leg up as you get started.
Yeah, great point. So tell me, let's just dive right in then. What is the most important thing that you'd like nonprofit leaders to know? Like what's the biggest takeaway if you had to boil it down into one major thing?
I really want executive directors to work on their nonprofit and not in their nonprofit. And what that means to me is look for ways for improving systems, look for ways to improve the culture. Don't just go about the tasks, because there's a lot of tasks. There's a million tasks. And that's the thing that can really bog down an executive director. In the book, I go through an example, kind of an extended example throughout the book about a director of like a fictional historical society, and she's overrun with running school tours. It's like, how does she get that off of her plate so that she can do some of the other work? So you have first just the recognition, this has to be done, but it doesn't have to be me. And that's a really important change that a director needs to go through. And then there's the task of like actually figuring out how to do it. But really that most important thing is that mind shift. This does have to be done, but it doesn't have to be me. And once you can start thinking about jobs and tasks in those ways, you're improving the nonprofit, not just going about your daily tasks because that's what you've always done or the person before you's always done.
I think we could do an entire episode on just this topic. Really. It's so interesting. And I find those individuals that are founders of organizations, I would suspect have even a harder time. So this is likely going to be the very small nonprofits, right? Are still maybe ran by the founders or someone very close to the founder. And the hardest part, what I've gathered from these individuals, they started a nonprofit for the programmatic piece of the work, right? They want to make a difference. They want to do good in the community. By focusing on working on the nonprofit and not in the nonprofit, it takes you away from likely why you started, right? And I'm projecting a little bit too, because I am the founder of my firm, and I had to make the decision, either I'm going to have my sanity, peace of mind, at some point, this is about 3.5 years ago, or I have to start making myself what I call more irrelevant. And there is no bigger ego shift than having to accept that not only is it best for your business to not be dependent on you, but if it's going to be successful, it absolutely cannot depend on you. And the same applies for the nonprofit world. And I think it's really difficult because I went from being a technical accountant, helping all of the accounting needs of all of the nonprofits, and that's what fed my soul. And that's why I started doing this. And then I had to shy away from those activities if I wanted us to be just a better ran organization. And because of those decisions and checking my ego at the door and letting go of all of the things, I've never worked less hours. I've never been less stressed. I have my life back, right? And there's a book called E-Myth, Erik, which you've probably heard of. It talks a lot about systems, processes, and finding other people to do the things so that you can focus on the most important things. And I can't tell you how many times I see nonprofit leaders in this space. I was talking with an organization that's, about $6 million a year, and the CEO is still doing therapy services, right? Because she's a licensed social worker. She's still doing therapy services for direct clients. She's also reviewing all of the billing census still to make sure that it's accurate. She's dealing with facilities. I mean, she does all of the things. And I just got off the call with another woman who it's an ED. They're about $700,000 a year, and she's doing all of the accounting and administrative work. And she says it takes up over half of her time, and that's a lot of time. Over half of your time. I love that.
I so agree. When I was hired to run the Grand Cinema, they said, we want you to do everything the last guy did, which was running the movie theater, plus education, fundraising, and special programs. And I realized, just because I had to make the theater run itself. Like I had to make the day-to-day operations run itself, because I couldn't be there, Saturday night plunging toilets like the guy before me did. And so I learned by doing how to do some of these things. And I like to say, work your way out of a job in that sense, because your real job comes into play when you are spending your time with major gifts. You spending your time planning. You're spending your time making decisions, big strategic decisions that are affecting the nonprofit. That takes time, and you can't rush it. And so you can get stories. That's the other thing I like to say. Ask, at a staff meeting, ask for stories. Like, what are some great stories? What are inspiring stories? And then write those down, because if you are being inspired by them, your donors will also be inspired by them. So there are ways to connect, even if you're not doing the work yourself.
Yeah, I feel like this can be a whole conversation. This is one of the things I'm absolutely passionate about, more so too, even in my own business, because it's been a journey that I've personally been on for the last 3.5 years. And I have a lot of colleagues that also own businesses. And I work obviously with individuals that are running businesses, although those are nonprofits. And I have this joke, although it's not quite a joke. And I said, my job is to make myself the most irrelevant person here which again is quite an ego shift for me. Like, I built this is my thing, but it cannot rely on me. So like you said, with the example of your movie theaters, it has to run itself. So, and I think this is even harder to do during periods of growth. Growth is such a hard thing for any business, especially small nonprofits. In fact, I have lots of stories that I'm very open and honest and transparent with, that it was so hard to grow from here to here than it was for me to go from here to here, right? Just getting off the ground and getting the momentum going is almost the hardest part.
Yeah.
What should these leaders of nonprofits be doing to help build the growth or to accelerate the growth of their nonprofits? What should they be doing in those periods?
Yeah, I really think about the small nonprofits. Often they find something that like works for a little while, like they have a great volunteer, or they're just kind of an in service for a little while where everyone's like really interested in them. Maybe it's a charismatic founder, but they can't like take those reasons for success into the future. Like it's like it works now, but they're not capturing the magic that makes it work. And so it's not sexy, but like I think that there are ways to do it with processes and systems. And I have broken it down into what I call the 4 Ds. So documentation, like, if you have a fall fundraiser, after it's done, just write a one sheet. When did I start? When do I wish I started planning this? Just some of those things, and put a calendar reminder in April, like, hey, start planning the fall fundraiser. Like, just giving a little bit of documentation will help you not reinvent the wheel constantly, which is what so many small nonprofits do. Database, having a database of donors. I mean, again, fundraising, it's great if you can get $1,000, but it's even better if you know how to ask for that $1,000 again the next year, and you have to have a database to do that. I think one of the other ones is development. Getting trainings, improving your systems, like staff, spending some time, even like once a quarter, just doing a little bit of staff work, a little bit of professional development, always pays off. And then finally, determination. And that's the thing that I think a lot of small nonprofit executive directors try to just like grit their teeth and like power through. And it is important. Like, someone has to write the grant, someone has to do these things. But if you try to just use determination to succeed and to drive growth, it's not enough. You need those other things as well, or otherwise you'll burn yourself out, or you'll just never get anywhere as soon as you step away.
100%. And I like when you talk about documentation, because I'm huge into systems. I like to joke we're actually an IT company that happens to do accounting for nonprofits, right? Because we just use systems and we document all the systems and all the processes and continuity. And then when we talked about irrelevancy, I was kind of joking about that, or creating processes or systems. I think some people think systems as in technology, but sometimes it's workflow. It's assignment of responsibilities. It's really clear. If someone needs to know how to do something, they have a place to go to do that. And I think people get really hung up on like the documenting of what is going on, or the thoughts or the things that they need to bring for the next year. I really encourage everybody to find easy ways to document. So one of the things that I've found that's easy for us is to do video recordings, because everything we do is on our computers, right? And so the process documentation, we do video screen recordings, and that here's our voice talking through, and you also have a visual to walk through screen by screen by screen, because everything that we do is on a software. So when you're trying to document how to enter a gift into your donor database, you could easily record that screen. And then maybe you have a template, right? On this is what our donor letters should look like. And here's the file for which you find those. And those are the sorts of things that I think documentation doesn't happen because people are so overwhelmed with how to even start documenting things. And it doesn't have to be a perfect process. Just doing it is better. This is where done is better than perfect, right?
100%. That's a really super simple way to do it. That makes sense.
And people get so hung up on, well, Tosha, I just don't have time to document all of these processes. Lean in on your team to document the processes, right? So if you are an ED listening and you have a development director, ask that person to document the process, the key processes that you've identified. And the same with maybe a volunteer coordinator, the same with your bookkeeper, the same with all of these key functions of the business. It doesn't have to be, I think people think of this really long narrative with screenshots and Word docs, and they easily get outdated, and then they have to spend hours and hours and hours redoing it periodically. It doesn't have to be that difficult, and definitely not that time consuming. So
I agree. That's great.
yeah. So in your book, you talk a lot about the relationship between an ED and their board. These relationships can be really great, or sometimes they're not so great. But why can this relationship be so hard for nonprofit executive directors, in your opinion or experience?
Yeah, I think what catches people off guard is if you've never done it, there's not a lot of preparation for it because it's an employment situation
Mm,
that's kind of unique.
hmm
Like the board isn't paid, but you are,
hmm
and the executive director doesn't work for any one board member, but collectively they can still fire you.
hmm
There's just some weird dynamics that come into play, and a lot of it really has to do with the fact that like nonprofit board members also don't always know how to do it either.
mm
um, they're usually there
hmm
because they love the operations of the nonprofit, and so they want to do that. I mean, they, if it's a theater, they want to pick the plays. You know what I mean? Like
hmm
that's what they love, and so they have this passion, and they don't know what their role is. They don't know that they should be planning, governing, fundraising, being ambassadors when requested. Like they have a long list of things that they should be doing. Um, and they need to be trained up, and the executive director needs to figure out how to work with them so that they do their role and the executive director does theirs. And it's a really difficult balance. And
hmm
whenever you have a group of people, um, it's a hard thing to sort out because every nonprofit's a little different in that regard.
Yeah, I can completely echo all of those things. And it is definitely a unique situation. And I also find this really interesting too in those situations where we have really small nonprofits led by founders, because I think that what that relationship looks like from a founder ED with what far removed multiple generations later, you have an ED of a 100-year-old organization that has a
Right.
more of a, it's not a friend and family type board situation. It's individuals within the community that are truly serving, and I think that that's a really interesting dynamic too. And I've seen numerous boards, and there's no rule book for this is the way that boards act, and they're all different, right? Like any relationship in any family, it's kind of any family, right? We might all do the same things, but in different ways, or not in different, or not at all the same. And the personality dynamics certainly shift too. So with that, I get this a lot. Speaking of boards, that boards are often too involved in the business of either what the executive director is doing or what the organization is doing. You hear it all the time. They have to approve every little thing, every little decision has to be ran by them, and they're kind of micromanaging the operations, or they're kind of towing the line. In some cases, they're not doing enough from fundraising and governance, but they're too involved on the operational side of things. I'm sure you've seen these
Oh yes,
situations as
many
well.
times.
Anybody that's been in the industry for, I don't know, any short period of time has seen this. What would you advise executive directors that are nodding their head at what we're describing, that find themselves in the situation? Any advice for these folks on how to handle these situations?
Yes, absolutely. Because I've been there. I have consulted with many nonprofits that have been there. It's very common, and I think that there's a process that I've seen works. It's worked for me, and I've helped other leaders do it as well. So I
Mm-hmm,
think that the first part is step one: give the board meaningful work. Like
mm-hmm,
ask for help with strategic planning. Ask for help filling tables at the fundraiser. Give them work that they should be a part of. That's big
mm-hmm,
work, like that you really do need the wisdom of crowds on in some cases, or just many hands, filling up those tables. So
mm-hmm,
that's step one. Give them real work that you actually do want them to be doing. The next part is, you are the leader of the nonprofit, and you need to step up and start acting like it
mm-hmm,
to a certain extent, which means slowly, after you've given them the work, start taking back some of the things that you do. But you can't just do that, full stop and say, well, now I'm doing this. Like boards are reluctant to do that, but you can do it
mm-hmm,
in a way that kind of brings it back to you slowly. And the first step to that, if you're not doing this already, is to write a monthly executive director report. Like tell the board what you're doing, especially on the things that like maybe
mm-hmm,
used to be them. write it down. Hey, so if the board used to spend 30 minutes at a meeting wordsmithing the newest brochure, and you don't need 10 people doing that, have an executive director report. And when you in there say, hey, I have finalized the brochure and we'll be sending it off to the printer next week. And you could include the PDF of it in there, but just in writing in advance, this is what I've done. I've finalized it. And you might find that no one cares. Everyone is, just moving on to the work that you've given them, the big work. Or maybe there's one person who really, really cares. And they're like, hey, what about this? What about this? And if you can take that comment and just say, let's connect after the board meeting so that we make sure we have time for the strategic planning or the whatever it is, you can just connect with that person one-on-one, the person who's kind of the rabble rouser. And if you can cut that off before sides get drawn, before arguments happen, you can just say, absolutely, let's talk after the meeting so that we can make sure our focus is on the big thing. Most of the time, the board is happy to not get drawn into those things when it really comes down to it, especially if you are assuming that leadership. So that's kind of my 3-step thing is you give the big work to the board. You make sure that you're telling them what you're doing so that they still feel connected. And then you look for ways to take those little things off of their plate like that. Because if you just do that with that one person, the next year you might know, hey, I'll just check in with this one person in advance. Or even by next year, it might be fine. Who knows? So I really do think there's that give and take that can really clear things up for you and help the board do their job as well.
I love that 3-step process too. And in communicating what we're doing before they even ask. It
Absolutely.
Immediately just de-escalates their fears or concerns or anxieties around things not getting done. So I think that's really good. That's really good. So Erik, it's been such a pleasure having this conversation. And I know that there is so much more we could be talking about today. That's all in your book, multiple books actually on any of your books on several of these topics, frankly, that we've talked about today on fundraising and executive leadership within an organization, board dynamics. You have a book for all of the major hot buttons, at least that I've been participating in the last 15 years. If somebody were interested in these books, what is the best way to find them? Where can people find you to get more information about the work that you've done?
Sure. All the books are available in most major online bookstores, but I do have at my website, which is forsmallnonprofits.com, a special bundle right now where if you buy from me in with the bundle of the board books, if you get more than 5 of those, you get 30% off of those, and then you get the 3 books for the executive director, kind of like the operations, for free. And because I'm able to work with the printer who does these, and skip the Amazon fees and things like that, it's the only place to get a deal like that. And if you want to, I think about it as leveling up your whole organization. So you tell the board, hey, I get these books for free if you want to get a board book, so buy for your board and then you get your books for free. And it's all at forsmallnonprofits.com.
Okay, great. And then if they wanted to follow you on social media or otherwise, they can also go to For Small Nonprofits. And by the way, FOR, not the 4, the number.
That's
4.
Correct.
ForSmallNonprofits.com. Is it also easy for us to find you on social media by way of your website? Is that a good way?
Or the best place to reach me on Twitter would be at Erik Hanberg. And so I should show up there as well.
Sounds great. Well, Erik, again, thank you so much for joining us. And for anybody that is struggling with any of these things, I strongly encourage you to check out more of Erik's books, read through them probably more than once. It could really drive some good conversations at your leadership level or otherwise. And also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have conversations that are not just about accounting. I actually love accounting, but what I love more is all of the operational challenges that comes into play on a day in and day out basis on running nonprofits. So we'll have more conversations like this on our YouTube channel. So check that out. Until next time, thanks everybody. Bye.